I turned 35, my husband suggested we live apart, saying, "I'd rather live with my mom than with you." I agreed, and he moved back to his mom's house. 3 days later, he had a really tough time. "I mean, I'd rather live with mom than with you." It was a quiet Friday night just as the clock struck midnight. My husband, James, was engrossed in an online game in the living room while I was sitting at the dining table working on some tasks I'd brought home. When James casually mentioned living separately as if he were discussing the weather, I was stunned. "Why?" I asked, needing to understand his reasoning, especially since our marriage had been struggling lately. "My name is Madison." I reminded myself, it was midnight on my 35th birthday, and I was in the middle of fertility treatments. James' sudden announcement felt like a bombshell, a cruel, unexpected birthday gift that left me completely speechless. Without taking his eyes off the game, James said, "You're 35 now, right? Even if you do get pregnant, it would be a high-risk pregnancy. I've given up on having kids with you. That's why I'm moving in with my mom." "What? That doesn't make any sense." I shot back, baffled by the disconnect between giving up on children and his decision to live with his mother. James and I had gotten married the year before last. We initially planned to enjoy some time as newlyweds, but James was eager to start a family. As the youngest of 3 brothers with each of his older brothers already married and having 3 kids each, James was often told by them that it's best to have children while you're young and energetic. Encouraged by this advice, we laughed it off and enthusiastically tried to start our own family, but a year passed without any success. At one point, James snapped, "You need to get this checked out." "Check what?" I asked, confused. "Find out why we're not having kids. There must be something wrong with you," he shouted. I was infuriated by his assumption, but I still went to see a gynecologist just to be sure. To my dismay, the tests revealed that I indeed had issues making conception difficult. The diagnosis was a shock. "I had no symptoms, and it was completely unexpected," Dr. Thompson explained. "It's challenging, but not impossible for you to conceive naturally." However, sharing this news with James felt overwhelming. That evening, I tried to explain the situation calmly over dinner. James's reaction was triumphant, as if he had been proven right. "I knew it was you," he said with a smug tone. "But I can still get pregnant," I stammered, trying to defend myself. James glared at me with a cold expression. "No, it hasn't happened yet, so it's not going to," he declared, jumping to conclusions. I felt my anger rise. "For all we know, you could be the one with the problem," I retorted, raising my voice. James shouted back, "Madison, the results are clear, yet you still try to blame me. Unbelievable." In a fit of rage, he slammed his hands on the table, causing me to flinch. "You're just a failure who can't have kids," he spat before storming off to the bedroom. James' harsh words left me in tears as I cleaned up the dishes alone. I told myself that he was just shocked and lashed out in the heat of the moment. If we could just have the child, I believe we could be a happy couple again. Determined to win back his heart, I started going to the gynecologist regularly and learning more about our situation. My anxiety grew, and even on the days most likely for conception, we had no success. I became obsessed with the idea of getting pregnant. One morning, I cautiously suggested, "Let's try tonight, please." He responded with disdain. "Isn't it embarrassing to bring up such a topic first thing in the morning?" I blushed, feeling awkward. Though it felt uncomfortable, such discussions should be natural between spouses. Trying to keep my tone gentle, I continued, "You want children too, right?" But James coldly replied, "Honestly, I don't even want kids. They're too expensive." I only considered it because my brother said a man isn't truly an adult until he has a wife and kids. But now with this excuse from you, I couldn't care less. From then on, whenever he tried to initiate anything, James would refuse, claiming he was too busy or too tired. I was also exhausted from work, and the repeated rejections were a blow to my pride. Lately, James had become absorbed in online gaming, staying up late into the night. As a result, we hardly talked, let alone had any intimacy. It felt like James had lost interest not only in having children but in me as well. Despite everything, I continued to visit the gynecologist. I was taken aback by the sheer number of couples at the fertility clinic. The place was always bustling. And even with an appointment, a 2 to 3 hour wait was common. It was somewhat comforting to see so many couples facing the same struggles, all doing their best. Occasionally, I'd see couples leaving the doctor's office with tears of joy streaming down their faces. The wives with still flat bellies would gently touch their stomachs while their husbands walked closely beside them. I envied them deeply. I wanted a child too, hoping it would restore James's love and bring me happiness. I clung to the fragile hope that having a child would mend things, but I hit a roadblock when I learned that advancing to further treatments would require James to undergo tests. It might now be impossible. The walk back from the clinic always left me feeling desolate and on the verge of tears. As I stepped onto the main street, I noticed an elderly woman in flamboyant attire catching my eye. Her thick makeup and brightly colored dress were almost overwhelming. Though I couldn't recall knowing anyone like her, she had an oddly familiar presence that momentarily distracted me from my tears. Could that be my mother-in-law? I wondered, staring in disbelief. Even though we live in the same city, we rarely cross paths, so she looked completely different from what I remembered. But the distinctive mole on her cheek was unmistakable. My mother-in-law was supposed to be a modestly dressed, typical grandmother, so her radical change in appearance was shocking. I quickly blended into the crowd trying to avoid her nonsense. The truth is my mother-in-law is quite a character, indulgent with herself, yet harshly critical of others. She's notorious for hurling insults that most would find shocking. She showers her youngest son, James, with favoritism, treating her other children merely as financial resources. Even her other sons detest her. When my father-in-law was dying of cancer last year, there was talk of her moving in with one of her sons, but both the eldest and the second son firmly refused. We expected the request might come our way, but she announced she would live alone while she was still healthy, possibly out of spite or simply due to her nature. After my father-in-law's passing, she made a scene accusing everyone of being ungrateful for stealing an old woman's retirement money and took all his inheritance without sharing it. Despite attempts by my brothers-in-law and James to divide it legally, she refused to budge, and no one could prevail against her. She told me, "I have no interest in getting along with you, so don't come to my house," she said. Despite her usual clashes with my sisters-in-law, this interaction was relatively peaceful. She didn't notice me that day and soon disappeared into a store. Her presence in that shop was so unlike the mother-in-law, I knew that I found myself staring at the store sign in disbelief. That night, I considered telling James about his mother's unusual behavior, but decided against it. She was an adult, and with my father-in-law gone, she was on her own. It wasn't my place to comment on her personal choices. After that, I saw her a few more times but chose to ignore it. Months went by, and as my birthday approached, James brought up the idea of moving out. I asked him, "Is there someone else you're interested in?" I wondered if his talk about his mother was just an excuse and if he was planning to remarry, but given that he spent most of his days gaming at home, it didn't seem like he was seeing anyone. I almost laughed at my own cold reasoning. James replied, "Well, there's a girl in my gaming group I kind of like, but it's just online. For all I know, she could be a guy pretending to be a girl." His response only made the situation seem more absurd. If he could make rational judgments about his online interests, why was he suddenly talking about moving out? It made no sense to me. James simply repeated, "I just want to live with my mom more than I want to live with you." I couldn't understand why James would prefer living with his mother instead of staying with me. "So have you come to dislike me and lost your love for me?" I asked, my heart itching just to voice the question. It felt as though he no longer needed me, a wife who couldn't bear children. I braced myself for his response, trying to hold back my sadness. "Not really." "What?" James' nonchalant reply caught me off guard. "Like I said before, I don't care about having kids anymore. What we need is a different financial strategy." "Financial strategy?" I repeated, puzzled by his unexpected words. James nodded with a calm demeanor. "Yeah. It's about my mom's inheritance," he said, his tone serious. I was confused, struggling to see the connection. My brothers are greedy. They'll use any excuse with having more kids to claim a larger share of mom's inheritance. I won't let that happen. I was stunned by his blatant admission but kept my thoughts to myself. "But your mother is in great health. Isn't it premature to be discussing inheritance?" "That's exactly the point. She dislikes you but favors me. Living with her now could give me an advantage in the inheritance. Plus, there's a substantial fortune my dad left her. We could live comfortably without working hard. We don't have children to look after us in our old age, so we'll need the money," James explained with a dismissive tone, but I was horrified by the implications. "So you wanted children because you needed them to care for you in your old age, and now that's not an option. You're aiming for a bigger share of your mother's inheritance." I hoped my assumption was wrong as I sought confirmation from James, but his response confirmed my worst fears. "Exactly. Children are supposed to look after their parents. By living with my mom now, I might even secure the entire inheritance," James said, showing his strong allegiance to his mother and lack of intention to be fair. I remained silent, feeling the depth of his familial ties. James continued, "When mom passes away, I'll move back in with you. You may not be able to have kids, but you're good at housework and bringing a decent salary. You're useful as a housekeeper. Understood?" "Let's get a divorce," I blurted out, my frustration overriding James' words. Who would agree to such terms? To live separately and then reunite later was an insult. I knew James, the pampered youngest son, had his flaws, but the selfish scheme was beyond forgiveness. I realized that staying with him would never bring me happiness. And at that moment, my love for James completely vanished. Let's get a lawyer to divide our assets and finalize the divorce. Divorce? I never mentioned anything about divorcing. Just living separately is fine. Hiring a lawyer seems excessive, James said, suddenly flustered, but seeming to reconsider. No. You'll be better off as a single man too. I won't be satisfied unless everything is divided fairly and legally. Plus, having a third party involved will prevent any lingering issues. Right? James smirked. Maybe you're right. If I get a large portion of Mom's inheritance, I'll be set for the future and can remarry. Just don't regret this. Don't count your chickens before they hatch. Make sure you have no regrets, I replied. The next day, I contacted a lawyer recommended by a divorced friend and arranged a consultation. I also informed the landlord that only James would be moving out and organized a moving company. While making these arrangements, I overheard James on the phone with his mother saying, "I want to live with you and take care of you." I was astonished that he had proposed moving out before even discussing it with her. According to James, his mother was excited about the arrangement and had a few requests. As a result, the divorce preparations proceeded surprisingly smoothly. Originally, the assets were to be split evenly, but my skilled lawyer negotiated a better deal for me, securing 70% of the assets, including compensation. Given James' selfish reasons for our divorce, I decided not to hold back and claimed what I was entitled to. 3 days after our divorce was finalized, James returned to his family home. I was relaxing in my apartment when my phone rang. It was James, and his voice was frantic. "Help me, please. Let's get married again. There's no inheritance. Mom spent it all on strippers. She's broke and deep in debt, and even the house has mortgage." "Well, that's unfortunate. Your mom was really into those strip clubs," I said, struggling to suppress a chuckle. Just days earlier, I had seen my former mother-in-law heading into a strip club. Curious, I had checked the price list and was shocked by the figures. She had been frequenting the place for some time, clearly spending a fortune. With James becoming obsessed with online gaming and neglecting visits, she had fallen for a stripper and squandered not only my father-in-law's inheritance, but also her own retirement savings, accumulating significant debt in the process. "Why didn't you tell me if you knew?" James demanded. "I don't criticize personal hobbies. I never stopped you from gaming, did I?" I shot back. James hesitated, then tried to shift the topic. "She's asking me to take out loans in my name, but that's not feasible. Could you give me the money from our property division? If we get back together, it's both of our money, right?" "Absolutely not." "Why not? You still care about me, don't you? Your husband is in trouble here. I did love you when we were married, but when you suggested moving out, any affection I have for you vanished completely. Especially now, when it's clear you're only after money, there's no chance we're getting back together. But my mom's demanding that I give her all my salary. She says it's only natural for children to support their parents. She was always so kind to me alone." James whined pathetically. But his and his mother's entitlement, that they should come first and everyone else should cater to them, was something I had no desire to support. "We're divorced now. We're strangers. Your family's problems are yours to deal with," I replied firmly before hanging up and blocking his number. I called my former sisters-in-law next. Although it had only been 3 days since the divorce, the urgency of the situation made it clear that waiting wasn't an option. I filled them in on the recent developments about my former mother-in-law and the details of the divorce. They expressed their sympathy and promised to deal with James. Soon after, my former brothers-in-law stormed into the family home, creating quite a scene. I heard about the commotion from one of my former sisters-in-law. After James' call, I decided to change the locks on my apartment for safety and made up my mind to move out. It felt like a complete break from the past. While searching for a new place, I discovered that the family home was up for sale. Though I could have inquired about James and his mother, I chose to focus on moving forward. I was ready to leave the past behind and start fresh. I'm now considering a pet-friendly apartment where I can enjoy a leisurely life with a cute cat.